How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to a video on one of my favourite car brands, Porsche. Now, since before I could remember, I've always been into cars, but I wasn't really into Porsches until I got quite a bit older. They seem to have aged a bit like a fine wine. Like, I didn't really understand 911s and why they were all exactly the same or other kind of stuff, but over the years, I've started to really appreciate them, and now I really badly want a Porsche. However, I'm not particularly well off, so I can't just go out and buy any old Porsche. I would have to keep my budget relatively low, so with that in mind, if I was going to become a Porsche enthusiast, what car would I buy? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk you through 5 different cars that I think are perfect to start off your Porsche enthusiasm, starting at around £5,000, going up to around 20 grand. Stunning cars, the kind of cars that will definitely give you that full Porsche experience. Don't forget that I'm in the UK, so prices in your country might be different. And don't forget that whenever you buy any second-hand car, maintenance, repairs, insurance, road tax, all that kind of stuff is important to remember. Do hit the like button if you enjoy this video. If it gets to 1,000 likes, I will do the most liked comment in the description as the next brand in this kind of series. So yes, comment down below as well to let me know which brands you'd like to see me do similar videos on. Subscribe as well if you're new. Without further ado, let's get into the video. We're not going to start with the iconic 911, instead let's begin with the 968, which finds its heritage in cars like the 944, 928 and the 924 that preceded it. Porsche originally planned to make a third generation of the 944, so started with the same chassis and layout, but ended up making so many changes that they renamed it the 968. They changed so much in fact that 80% of the parts were brand new, and though it does look slightly similar to the 944, it does also have its own style and vibe. Porsche threw a 3-litre inline-4 up front, which made 240 brake horsepower, taking the car to 60 in 6.5 seconds. Of course, it's rear-wheel drive and well balanced with almost 50-50 weight distribution. Now, I mentioned they put that engine in the front of the car, despite the fact that Porsches are known for being rear-engined beasts. This is known as the transaxle era of Porsche, and it's hugely important for some of the cars we see today. Of course, this started with the 924, which was originally a VW project, which they scrapped during the fuel crisis and handed over to Porsche, who then took the concept forward to production. What made it special at the time was its exceptional handling, which many reviewers noted. This ethos was carried through to the 968. Now, a lot of people overlook the front engine Porsches, but the 968 is actually a very rare car, as it came during a global recession, meaning sales were poor and less than 13,000 of them were produced in total. This means that prices today remain pretty high, as these classic Porsches start at around £10,000 at the lower end, while at the £20,000 mark you'll get a very clean 1992 example. I would expect to pay around the 15 to 18k mark for nice ones. One thing I personally love about these is the interior, as you can see a lot of inspiration for Porsches of today, especially in terms of the seats and dashboard. The same can be said for a lot of the exterior as well. Buying one of these is signing yourself up to classic car ownership, so do be wary of this, and maybe get in with Porsche Club GB, who offer great advice on what to look for in these. The Motronic system, which is effectively the fuel and electronics, is known to go wrong, and the exhaust system is known to break as well. Check the suspension, wishbones and anti-roll bar for wear, and look on the lower regions for rust. Next up we have the predecessor to the 968, the 944, which you can even get in a hallowed turbo spec for under £20,000. That means you get a 2.5 litre turbocharged inline-4, which makes 250 brake horsepower and will manage 0 to 60 in 5.9 seconds. The 944 was at the time the most successful Porsche sports car in history, at least in terms of sales, with more than 160,000 sold in total, which is pretty sick for a car produced between 1982 and 1991, let alone a luxury sports car of that era. It's based on the same platform as the Porsche 924 and came as a result of the 924 GTP Le Mans, which actually won in the 24-hour race in its class and came 7th overall. You can immediately see the similarities between the two cars, with the GTP having that wider, more wedge and square-like appearance. This informed the design language for the 944, hence it has pretty aggressive wheel arches and is much squarer, which is basically how car design language was in the 1980s anyway. Despite this aggressive exterior, the interior focus was on luxury, and some of the specs you can get on these are sick for the 80s, like the really rogue checkered flag seats and the coloured carpets, which are a vibe as well. As these were such a sales success, they are much cheaper than the 968, but that's a major benefit if you're into track driving, as these have been a staple track car for quite a long time, and there are plenty of 944 race series around the world, like the 944 Cup in the US US and the 944 Challenge in Australia. This is all thanks to the amazing handling that these offer right out of the box, despite being such an old car. £6,000 is around the lowest you'll find these listed for in non-turbo spec, which is crazy as these have exploded in price recently. You'll find clean old turbos this is for around the 17 to 20k mark, but they have a few miles on them. If you're after a turbo, check for rumbling or smoke, as this is a bad sign. The engines on these are known to be relatively reliable if well maintained, and some owners have put well over 250,000 miles on them. When poorly maintained, they have been known to have head gasket failure, so do be aware of that. Also, listen for whining from the transmission too, as synchros can go. The 968 was effectively the predecessor to the Porsche Boxster 986, which jumped into production in 1996 and carried through to 2004. It switched up the format pretty significantly for the mid-level Porsche sports car bracket, going for a mid-engine, rear-wheel drive layout rather than having the engine up front like the previous two cars on this list, and being exclusively available as a convertible. That engine in the 986S model is a 3.2 litre flat 6, which makes 260 brake horsepower and will manage 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, but you could of course get a smaller engined and slightly less focused model in non-S spec. In 1993, Porsche showed a concept version of the 986, which was inspired by a collection of classic Porsches, and the idea was to make a car that would reinvigorate that middle market for the brand. As the 968 wasn't selling so well, they needed to switch up the formula and make something that would absolutely smash sales targets, especially as this is the era that Porsche particularly struggled on cash flow. They were obviously successful, as it was the best selling Porsche up until the Cayenne took over, and we still have the Boxster name on new 718s today, so it was a great move by the company, some even saying that it's the car that rescued the brand when only die-hard Porsche fanatics were into buying the 911s. Despite this, originally I would argue the car didn't age so well. It did end up looking like the ugly duckling in the Porsche lineup, but now I would definitely say it's fine-wined itself into being a modern classic, and with the status of saving the brand that many people are hugely enthusiastic about today, it was probably always going to become a modern classic. It received a facelift in 2002 which made a few small changes, most notably on the fried egg headlights, which were already controversial, but they removed the yellow yoke indicators from it and replaced them with clear ones. These start at around £5,000 at the bottom end, and you get an insane one for £20,000, but I personally would expect to pay around £8,000 in our current market. A key problem with these is the hassle of actually getting into the engine, which can sometimes make labour more expensive when you send it to get fixed. Cracked cylinder bores were a known issue early on, but if the car has more than 50,000 miles on it, it's unlikely to be an issue, according to Porsche Club GB. IMS and RMS failure are the main known issues though, and they're relatively expensive to sort out, so do be aware of this. So I hope you're enjoying this video. If you are, make sure you hit the like button. As I said, 1,000 likes and I'll do this video again for a different brand. And we need less than 8,000 subscribers now to hit 100k, so please do hit subscribe if you haven't already. I think like 50% of you haven't subscribed, so let's get on it. The car that followed the 986 was of course the 987, which came as a Boxster, but for the sake of this video we'll be talking about the Cayman, the hardtop fastback coupe version of the convertible Boxster. Porsche purposefully placed the Cayman into the market to sit between the 911 and the Boxster, allowing those who wanted a 911 but couldn't afford it to get into a car that was still a hardtop two-door rear-wheel drive Porsche sports car, just for a fraction of the cost. If you wanted to get into the brand, you could always get an entry-level Boxster, but the Cayman gave you an extra level of exclusivity despite being practically the same car. To cement this, originally the Cayman was only available in S spec, before the non-S arrived slightly later down the line, being slightly cheaper too. Though some have argued it's a bit underpowered, it wasn't ever meant to challenge the 911 flagship car, so instead of offering speed, it offers great balance and handling that the brand is renowned for. It has a 3.4 litre flat 6 which makes 290 brake horsepower and does 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds. Outside of that, the Cayman definitely still offers you a pretty cool package for your money, with nice interior specs available and a collection of exterior ones too. The many different alloy designs are particularly difficult to navigate in my opinion, as I have no idea which I like most. It got an update in 2009 which many people call the 987.2, which provided a few key updates, one of which was the option of the PDK automatic gearbox as opposed to the Tiptronic. However, it's important to note that you're unlikely to find a Cayman S 987.2 for under 20 grand in its current market. That's not the end of the world though, as I think whether you get a 0.1 or a 0.2, it's a beautiful looking machine, and I'm personally considering getting one in the future depending on budget. Speaking of budget, these start at around £12,000, although they are of course cheaper in non-S spec. For 20k we'll be looking at a 2007 example with around 50,000 miles on the clock, but I would expect to pay around 15 to 17k for one of these. Porsche Club GB note that around 5% of Caymans have suffered from bore scoring and IMS failure, and unfortunately the S is more susceptible to this than the non-S. It's pretty expensive to get sorted, so definitely worth considering going for a model from 2007 onwards, as these were fitted with a stronger bearing. Of course, I couldn't make a video on cheap Porsches for enthusiasts without including a 911, and it's one of my current favourite models, the 996, specifically in Carrera 2 spec, which means it has a 3.6 litre flat 6 which makes 320 brake horsepower and will do 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds. Like the 986 Boxster mentioned previously, this got those fried egg headlights, deviating from the normal circular ones, and a bunch of people lost their minds over it. At the time it definitely was a controversial decision and a lot of people didn't like them, and of course they've returned to a more rounded shape ever since, but these headlights definitely give the 996 a different look which I'm sure will be considered classic in future. But the headlights weren't even the most controversial feature of this car. It moved away from being air-cooled to being the first ever water-cooled 911. The shape was also slightly different to the 993 it replaced, being generally sleeker throughout. And again, despite all the loud noise surrounding it, it sold well, in a time where Porsche really needed it to. It arguably turned the car from being just an enthusiast car to something the wealthier masses could buy and enjoy as a daily sports car, but that laid the foundations for the 911s we see today, and that's definitely a positive in my books. If you're after the full 911 experience, then spec matters. Go for a hardtop with the manual gearbox in rear wheel drive rather than the Carrera 4 which has all wheel drive. By reading through the many articles on Porsche Club GB and reviews by owners, that seems to be the agreed upon formula. Though the interiors do look a bit dated, they're still lovely cars for the money, and I'm not sure how much longer these will be available for under £20,000, as they currently start at around £12,000, and at 20 grand you'll be looking at a 2000 example with around 60k on the clock. As with the Cayman, IMS failure is the main problem to be aware of, as a full engine rebuild will set you back half the cost of the car. There are some other smaller problems, but experts and owners note that in general, despite higher maintenance cost, it's a very dependable car. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching as always, and a massive thank you to the patrons for their continued support. I really do appreciate it. If you like this video and want to see more like it, make sure you hit the like button and let me know as well in the comments which other brands you'd like to see. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one.